Speaking as David Prentice's dealer, and with some 30 years' experience in observing and handling British and European painting, I have no doubt that the Malvern's artist holds a significant place in British landscape painting of the late 20th and early 21st century. Now we hear David himself talking about his life painting on the Malvern Hills.
The earliest memory I have of Malvern is coming up, actually this beacon, but from the other side, on a pony with my grandmother, who was very elderly then. I think she must have been in her 70s or 80s, as I am now. And she had the pony to save her legs, and I was a little boy, you see. So that was my very earliest memory, and my parents came as well. And then it carried on from there. You know, we would come out on the Midland Red bus from the 144X from Navigation Street in the centre of Birmingham, or sometimes my father got us out here in the car. But it was connected to other things. I mean, we go to places like Evesham, the Evesham Vale, and you know, get boxes of plums and that stuff like that to take home for my mum to make jam. But then there were lots of places around the Malverns as well, which I loved.
The noted exhibition curator, Andrew Dempsey, has recently written an appreciation on the painter entitled The Englishness and Modernity of David Prentice, in which he says that he's been fixated on David Prentice, the painter of grids, and one of the founder members of the Icon Gallery. He has never tried to articulate the bridge to David Prentice, the painter of landscapes, and now cityscapes. And yet the painter of grids, who he used to think of as an ambitious member of the Modernist International, had a considerably shorter life than the painter of landscapes. He can now see, and is more than ever convinced by the newest paintings, that it is the latter painter who is engaged ambitiously with those great subjects of English art, the landscape and the weather. The earlier and freer abstract paintings have the feel of being abstracted from something in the observable world, and they are not so far from the way he treats the illumination of the cloudbursts in the recent landscapes. It is the painter of landscapes who is aiming to make a real contribution to the continuum of English art.
In terms of actually working on the Malverns, I was in my 50s by the time I started working on the Malverns. Although I'd known them since, as I say, since I was about 3. I'm fairly random about my walks. I kind of make my mind up two minutes before I set off. And I think what I'm beginning to do is develop an instinct for where it's best to be depending on the weather. That's one of the conditions. You know jolly well if it's the morning, the sun is going to be in a certain position, or in the afternoon, whatever, or if it's, you know, if there are lots of clouds and things scudding across, you know that the clouds are going to form shadows on certain parts of the hills and actually do a lot of the work for you in terms of what you're drawing, you know, because the cloud shadows move across the form and it almost like stroking it. So you get this real sense of the way the form works. But it varies. I mean, I walk just for the sake of walking. I find it very exhilarating. I have been walking up until I had my hip sorted out. I had been walking every day for about 5 years, I suppose, quite more than that. And I do about sort of between 2 and 4 miles, that sort of distance, you know, up here and back down to the house again, or, you know, round the other hills at the other end, or come up through the quarry. There's a gorgeous walk. And I would virtually plonk my bottom down wherever it suited me, really. I mean, if I fancied something, I'd just stop and make a little watercolour or a drawing. And I tried to do that as a sort of regular warm-up, I suppose, to each day. I mean, the drawings, in a way, don't matter. It's what's being fixed in your, you know, in your sort of internal camera, as it were, which then allows you to work, you know, very freely when you're back in the studio. I mean, in a sense, all I'm doing when I draw on the spot is look and record. I mean, nothing else sort of intervenes in a sense. It's a kind of mute activity. I mean, I'm not actually thinking about ideas necessarily, although ideas do crop up. I suppose in terms of drawing on the spot, the most significant thing I get from drawing is a kind of, it's difficult to describe really, a kind of rhythm about how things work in space. It's quite an abstract kind of idea really. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in, you know, recording the topography very accurately, although I get things in the right place. I think that's quite important, you know, and scale needs to be correct and so on, just for sheer pride apart from anything else. I know jolly well that what I'm putting on the paper is not like what's out there. It's a kind of equivalent of it. So I suppose that if that's what you mean by feeling, that's what I'm getting back from it. There's this kind of rhythm, proportion, line, space. Essentially what I'm doing with the oil paintings is I'm making kind of abstract paintings in a way. They're not concerned with a bit of, you know, topographical landscape at the bottom and nothing else. What I'm trying to do is make I'm trying to work with colour in the same way that somebody like Rothko would, you know, so you're using colour as a kind of as a feature of the arrangement of the whole surface of the canvas. So the dramatic skies are, you know, quite an essential part of that. If I make them, I mean, there are paintings where I've just made the sky completely single coloured, but that will be for kind of quite an abstract reason. These are little paintings that I do over about 20 minutes each day when I go for a walk. I mean, I don't go walking every day, but you know, every odd day or whenever the weather's awful or good or interesting, I'll go out and sit and make these things. I do them really as a kind of limbering up each day, I suppose. I mean, I don't actually find that I use them, I mean, for further work. I mean, they're just done for the, I suppose, for the pleasure of just the pleasure of doing them in a way. There's a lot to be said for just sort of going and immersing yourself in the landscape. And one of the ways of doing it is to make these rather brief records of what you're looking at. And then I find that this kind of liberates me really to kind of improvise on the paintings that I'm working on in the studio. You know, it fixes the image in my head, as it were. I mean, I know a lot of people use sketchbooks as, you know, as the basis of what they do. These aren't really like that. I quite like having them in books too. I mean, I make the books myself, and I quite like the idea of a book full of stuff which has no commercial value or has no existence outside being a book. I mean, otherwise I'd paint them on one sheet of paper. These are the paintings are just divided down the middle by this spiral back, so that they can't be taken apart really. You know, I pity anybody who's going to try and turn these into art on the wall. I mean, I like them as a book form. You know, it's something I can go back to and kind of remember the day, as it were. There are lots and lots of them. I mean, they're good and bad and indifferent, and, you know, I just accept whatever happens each time. I think essentially I work as out of a set of abstract values. When I'm making a painting, it is about sort of fairly formal things, I think. It's about colour, form, line, design, things of that sort. And I suppose to some extent I'm trying to achieve a kind of formal balance when I make a painting. On the other hand, I work in a very random way. Having made drawings on the hills, I then do not use them. I don't work from them. I suspect that the image is sort of embedded in my head, and it's a bit like playing jazz. Once I know the chord sequence, I can then kind of improvise over that basis, I suppose, is the way I would describe it. So, in a sense, although I'm trying to achieve a kind of formal balance and a formal structure, it is done through improvisation and accident, basically. So the paintings are made not exactly randomly, but I'm quite happy to kind of put blocks of colour here, there, and everywhere, trying to make something that kind of kicks off a response about weather or time or something of the sort, space, that sort of thing. It's almost like searching for an image. You know, I'm pushing paint around until something clicks, and then once it's clicked, I can kind of then focus and make the painting work as I want it. Yes, I use a whole range of mediums, beeswax, Spectrogel, which is it's a resin anyway, which is fairly fast drying and will give the paint some body. I mean, I use things like pumice powder, that's marble dust. Got a tin of wax, a coffee can full of wax there. Whatever seems suitable for thickening, thinning, bulking out. I mean, some of the paint qualities in this, as you see, it's almost like sort of cement, and that's when I put a lot of pumice into it or something like that. It kind of opens the structure. I mean, I use dry pigment as well. I'll mix dry pigment into oil paint, which again gives it kind of a slightly more intense colour and opens the structure. I'm not quite sure what it does in time. I mean, I'm not sure whether dirt won't get into the sort of the sort of texture of the paint over time. Hopefully they'll be looked after. Well, somebody said to me the other day, which was, I thought, really a very nice compliment. They said, yes, I can see they're yours. I mean, although they were 40 years old, those paintings in Icon, he said, I can see they're yours, the handwriting's still the same. And I think what he was responding to was some of what I'm talking about, these rather formal concerns that exist within painting my landscape paintings, because I think when I'm painting landscape as opposed to townscape, I think there are certain common elements, you know, the use of bars and marks and straps across the painting, which are very much part of the way I think, I suppose, the way I construct a painting. You can see the same kind of elements happening, I think, in these paintings as you can in the paintings that are at the beginning of Icon in 1962. Perhaps one doesn't have, you know, many ideas or in one's life. Perhaps it's, you know, a rather more repetitive process than one gives oneself credit for. You tend to think you're being inventive, but the same kind of ideas come up over and over again. You know, it's almost a kind of fixation, I find.